Cab driver took lost boy home without knowing he was an heir to a fortune. Frank Miller was finishing another day of work when he saw the child sitting alone on the park bench. The boy was quietly crying, his face hidden between his small hands, and seemed completely lost amid all the commotion. That's when Frank noticed something odd. This boy didn't seem to belong there. His clothes were unlike anything Frank was used to seeing in the neighborhood where he'd worked for 15 years. "Hey, little one, are you okay?" Frank asked, crouching beside the bench. The boy lifted his tear-streaked face. His blue eyes were red from crying. "I can't remember," the child murmured, his voice trembling. "Can't remember what, son?" "My house, I know it's on Blossom Street, number... The boy pressed his hands to his forehead. "I don't remember the number." Frank felt a pang in his chest. 3 years ago, after losing his own son in an accident, he'd developed a special tenderness for children. He couldn't just ignore a situation like this. "What's your name?" "Ethan," the boy replied, wiping his nose with his sleeve. "Ethan Reynolds." Frank took a closer look at the child's clothes. The white polo shirt had a small embroidered logo he didn't recognize, but it looked expensive. The pants were made of fine fabric, and the sneakers, though dirty from walking, were clearly a high-end brand. "Ethan, where are your parents?" The boy shook his head as if he didn't know or didn't want to answer. "My mom, she brought me here and told me to wait. But it's been so long." Ethan glanced at the darkening sky. "She said she'd come back, but I think I forgot something important." Frank looked around. The park was emptying, and soon it would be dangerous for a child to stay there alone. Besides, there was no sign of anyone looking for Ethan. "Do you remember your parents' names?" "Their phone number?" Ethan closed his eyes, concentrating hard. "Mom's name is Jennifer. Dad... The boy seemed confused. "I think Dad doesn't live with us anymore." Frank sighed. The situation was getting more complicated. He couldn't leave the child alone, but he also didn't know what to do. "Ethan, would you like to come with me to my house? We can try calling your mom from there, and you can stay safe until she shows up." The boy hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. There was something about this man that made him feel protected. Frank led Ethan to his yellow cab. On the drive to his home in Forest Hills, New York City, the cabbie tried to get more information, but the boy seemed genuinely confused about many details of his life. Frank's house was simple but welcoming. 2 small steps led to a yard with a few plants and furniture that told the story of a life lived with honesty. "You must be hungry," Frank said, opening the fridge. "How about a sandwich?" While preparing the food, Frank watched Ethan. The boy looked around curiously, but without the disdain you'd expect from a child used to luxury. He seemed genuinely fascinated by the simplicity of the place. "Mr. Frank?" Ethan called timidly. "You can just call me Frank, okay?" "Frank, your house is really nice. It's different from mine." "How so?" Ethan thought for a moment before answering. "At my house, there are lots of people who clean and organize, and there are rooms I'm not even allowed to go into. Here feels more like a real home." Frank felt a twinge of concern. That description suggested Ethan came from a very wealthy family, which made it even stranger that he was alone in the park. After Ethan ate, Frank helped him take a bath and lent him one of his old t-shirts, which hung loosely on the boy's thin frame. Ethan laughed for the first time since they'd met. "I look like a ghost," the boy said, examining himself in the mirror. "We'll fix that tomorrow, okay?" Frank smiled too. "For now, you can sleep on the couch. It's comfortable." That night, Frank lay awake thinking about the situation. He tried calling the police station, but they told him he'd need to wait at least 24 hours before filing a missing person report, especially without more information about the child's family. The next morning, Mrs. Betty, Frank's neighbor, knocked on the door. She was a 65-year-old woman who knew everyone in the neighborhood and always kept an eye on what was happening around her. "Frank, dear, who is this boy?" she asked, as soon as she saw Ethan eating breakfast. "It's a long story, Mrs. Betty. I found him lost in the park yesterday." Mrs. Betty studied Ethan carefully, especially his clothes, which Frank had washed and dried overnight. "Frank, these clothes..." She touched the fabric of the polo shirt. "This is expensive stuff, you know." My granddaughter works at a designer store in the mall, and she's shown me pieces like this. This boy must come from a very wealthy family. Mrs. Betty's observation confirmed Frank's suspicions, but it only made the situation more mysterious. Why would a child from a wealthy family be alone in a middle-class neighborhood park? "Ethan," Frank called, "do you remember anything about your family? Where they work? What kind of car they have?" The boy closed his eyes, concentrating. "There's a big black car, and there's a man who drives for Grandpa, and there's a really big house with a garden that has a fountain." "Your grandpa?" "You said Grandpa." Ethan nodded, but his face quickly grew sad. Grandpa William was sick. Mum was really worried, and there were lots of people at home talking loudly, arguing. Frank and Mrs. Betty exchanged concerned glances. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. That afternoon, Frank decided to take Ethan to Blossom Street to see if the boy recognized any houses. It was a long street that ran through several neighborhoods in New York City, but it was worth a try. They took a taxi and began driving down the street from the start. Ethan watched carefully out the window, but with every block they passed, he shook his head. "Not here," he kept saying. When they reached the part of Blossom Street that ran through the Upper East Side, Ethan suddenly perked up. "Wait, this part feels familiar." Frank stopped the car and they got out. It was an upscale residential area with large, well-kept houses. Ethan walked along the sidewalk, studying each gate. "I remember coming here a few times with Mom," he said, "but it wasn't our house. It was someone important's house." "Someone in the family?" "I think so, but I didn't like coming here much. The people talked too loud, and I always had to stay quiet." As they walked, Frank noticed some people watching them curiously. A man watering the garden of one house followed them with his eyes until they turned the corner. "Frank, I'm scared," Ethan whispered, holding the cab driver's hand. "Why, sweetheart?" "I don't know. I'm just scared of remembering things." Frank sensed something was very wrong with this story. He decided he needed to be more careful and learn more about Ethan's family before making any decisions. On the way back, they stopped at a diner so Ethan could have a snack. While the boy ate, Frank took the opportunity to search more carefully through the pockets of the clothes Ethan was wearing when he found him. In one of the smaller pants pockets, he found something that had gone unnoticed the night before, a small torn piece of paper. It looked like part of a business card. On the remaining fragment, he could only make out Knowles Law Firm and part of an address in downtown New York City. "Ethan, do you recognize this?" Frank showed the paper to the boy. Ethan looked at it, and his eyes widened. "That's from Dr. Richard's office. He always visited Grandpa." "Dr. Richard?" "Yeah. He and Grandpa would talk about important things. And after that, Mum would always get sad." Frank carefully tucked the paper away. He finally had a concrete lead to try and locate Ethan's family. That night, after Ethan fell asleep, Frank searched online for Reynolds Law Firm. He found the website of a large law firm in downtown New York City, specializing in corporate law and estate planning. The senior partner was named Richard Reynolds. In the photos on the site, Frank saw an elegant man in his 50s with graying hair and a professional smile. But what caught his attention the most was a recent article he found on a finance website. Businessman William Reynolds transfers control of companies to son ahead of medical treatment. Frank read the entire piece. William Reynolds owned a business group that included hotels, construction firms, and a supermarket chain. According to the report, he had been diagnosed with a serious illness and had decided to organize his succession. The article mentioned that William had a son, Richard Reynolds, who would take over as president of the companies, and a granddaughter, who would be the beneficiary of a trust fund. Frank noticed there was no mention of any grandsons. The next morning, Frank decided to call the law firm. After several transfers, he managed to speak with a secretary. "Good afternoon. I'm trying to locate the family of a lost child. I found a business card from your office with him, belonging to a certain Dr. Richard Reynolds. Can you hold for a moment?" After a few minutes, A man's voice came on the line. "This is Richard Reynolds. You said you found a child?" Frank explained the situation, leaving out some details as a precaution. "Interesting," Richard said after hearing everything. "Can you meet me at the office today? And please bring the child." "Of course. What's the address?" Richard gave him the address, and Frank scheduled the meeting for late afternoon. When he hung up, he felt relieved to have finally found someone from the family, but also uneasy. There was something in Richard's voice that didn't sit right with him. "Ethan," he called to the boy who was playing in the backyard, "we're going to meet Dr. Richard today." Ethan stopped playing immediately. His face paled. "I don't want to go." "Why not, kiddo?" He always makes Mom sad. And when he comes, there's always a fight afterward." Frank crouched down in front of Ethan. "Can you tell me what you remember about those fights?" Ethan sat on the grass and hugged his knees. "Grandpa got really sick, and then lots of people started coming to the house. Dr. Richard, Aunt Patricia, Uncle Robert. They would yell about money and who was going to take care of Grandpa's things." "And your mum?" "Mum cried a lot. She said people wanted to take things from her, things Grandpa left for me." Frank felt a chill. The situation was starting to make sense, and it wasn't good. "Ethan, do you remember what your mom told you when she left you at the square?" The boy closed his eyes, concentrating hard. "She said I had to go somewhere safe and that she'd come back for me when everything was calm. And he told me not to tell anyone my real name if someone asked. But you told me." Ethan looked at Frank with his trusting blue eyes. "Because you're nice. I could tell right away." Frank felt his heart tighten. It was becoming clear that Ethan's mother had hidden the boy on purpose, and there was likely a serious family dispute over an inheritance involved. He decided he wouldn't take Ethan to the office that day. First, he needed to understand the situation better. He called Richard Reynolds again and said something had come up, rescheduling for the next day. That night, Frank talked at length with Mrs. Betty about the situation. "Frank, from what you're telling me, this child could be in danger," the neighbor said. "These inheritance fights can get very ugly." "I was thinking the same thing, Mrs. Betty. But what can I do? I can't keep Ethan forever." "You can if it's what's best for him," she said seriously. "Sometimes family isn't just about blood." The next morning, Frank was woken up by Ethan shaking his arm. "Frank, there's a woman outside staring at our house," the boy whispered, clearly frightened. Frank went to the window and saw an elegant woman, around 40 years old, standing across the street. She wore expensive clothes and was studying the house carefully. When she noticed Frank had seen her, she quickly got into a black car and drove away. "Ethan, do you recognize that woman?" "I think it's Aunt Patricia," the boy answered, trembling. "She's really mad at me." Frank realized the situation was escalating fast. Somehow, the family had found out where Ethan was. He knew he had to act immediately. He called a lawyer he knew, Michael Carter, who specialized in family law and had helped other cab drivers in tough situations. "Dr. Michael, I need your help urgently," Frank explained the whole situation. "Frank, this is very serious. From what you're telling me, there could be a custody issue here. You need to file a report at the police station right away and request temporary guardianship." "Can I do that?" "Absolutely. Since the child was abandoned and you took him in, you have the right to ask for temporary custody until things are settled. But it has to be today, before the family makes a move." Frank got Ethan ready, and they headed to the police station. On the way, he explained what they were going to do. "Ethan, we're going to report that I found you, and the sheriff will ask you some questions. You can tell him everything you remember, okay? You'll stay with me?" "Always." At the station, Frank filed a report about finding Ethan. Sheriff Johnson was very attentive and gently asked the boy several questions. Ethan talked about the arguments at home, being cared for by his sick grandpa, and how his mother had taken him to the park. "Frank, given the circumstances, I'll file a temporary custody request for you," the sheriff said. "This child was clearly abandoned in the middle of a family conflict, and you've shown responsibility by taking care of him. How long will it take?" "If no one contests it, it could be approved today, but I suspect there will be opposition." The sheriff was right. 2 hours later, Richard Reynolds showed up at the station, accompanied by an elegant woman and another man in a suit. "Sheriff, I'm Richard Reynolds, an attorney and this child's uncle. I'm here to take my nephew home." Ethan, who had been sitting beside Frank, hid behind him when he saw the three adults. "Mr. Reynolds, the child is under the temporary guardianship of Mr. Frank Miller, who was the one who found him," the sheriff explained. "This is absurd. He's our relative. He should stay with the family." The elegant woman, whom Frank assumed was Patricia, approached Ethan. "Ethan, sweetheart, we came to get you. You're coming home with us." "I don't want to," Ethan replied, clinging tighter to Frank. "Don't be rude, Ethan," Richard said firmly. "We're your family." "Mr. Reynolds," the sheriff interrupted, "the child has made it very clear he doesn't want to go with you. Besides, I need to clarify some questions about his abandonment." "What abandonment?" "He got lost. The child said he was left in the square on purpose by his mother." "Where is his mother?" Richard and Patricia exchanged glances. "Jennifer. His mother is going through a tough time. She's in medical treatment." "What kind of treatment?" "That's a private family matter," Patricia replied coldly. The sheriff didn't seem satisfied with the answer. "Until I have more information about the child's mother, temporary custody remains with Mr. Frank." Richard grew agitated. "This is outrageous. We'll challenge this decision immediately." After the three left, the sheriff spoke privately with Frank. "Frank, I think you did the right thing. There was something off about those people, and the child's reaction was very clear. What happens now? You have temporary custody for 30 days. During that time, we'll investigate the family situation and try to locate the mother. If we find out the child was truly in danger, you can petition for permanent custody." On the way home, Ethan was quieter than usual. "Ethan, are you okay?" "Frank, you won't give me to them, right?" "Never, son, I promise." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. That night, Frank couldn't sleep. He was worried about possible retaliation from Ethan's family. He decided he needed to understand the situation better before it was too late. The next morning, he went to see Dr. Michael Carter, the lawyer he had consulted. "Dr. Michael, I need to understand more about this inheritance situation. Can you investigate the Reynolds family for me?" "Of course. I'll do some digging and see what I can find out." Meanwhile, Frank decided to enroll Ethan temporarily in a school near his home. He spoke with the principal, Mrs. Linda, explaining the situation. "Mrs. Linda, I know it's unusual, but Ethan needs some normalcy while we sort out the legal matters." "Of course, Frank, we'll arrange temporary paperwork. The important thing is that the child is safe and attending school." Ethan was excited about going to school. In his first week, his teachers were impressed by his level of knowledge. "Frank," Mrs. Linda said in a meeting, "Ethan has an education level far beyond his age. He speaks English and Spanish fluently and has math skills equivalent to a 10-year-old. Is that normal? No. It suggests he had very expensive, specialized tutoring, private teachers most likely." This only confirmed Frank's suspicions about Ethan's wealthy background. A week later, Dr. Michael called with important information. "Frank, I've uncovered some very interesting things about the Reynolds family." "What did you find?" "First, William Reynolds really did pass away 2 weeks ago. Second, he left a highly controversial will." Frank's heart raced. "What do you mean, controversial?" "From what I've gathered through some contacts at the courthouse, the will leaves the majority of the inheritance to a grandson, Ethan Reynolds Miller. But there's a very specific clause about who should be the child's legal guardian." "What kind of clause?" "Apparently, William Reynolds specified that his grandson would only inherit if raised by someone of upright character and financially disinterested. And more, it seems the boy's mother has full authority to choose this guardian." Frank fell silent, processing the information. "Dr. Michael, does this mean—" "It means Gabriel's mother may have chosen you on purpose, and that the other relatives are desperate to gain custody of him, probably to control the inheritance." "But where is his mother?" "That's still under investigation, but I suspect she might be hiding, afraid of her own family." That night, Frank talked to Ethan about his grandfather. "Ethan, can you tell me about your grandpa William?" The boy's face lit up for the first time since they'd spoken about his family. "Grandpa William was the best. He always played with me and told me stories. He said I was his most precious treasure. Did he ever talk about work with you?" "Sometimes. He said he had many companies and that one day I'd help take care of them. But he said I first had to learn to be a good person." "What do you mean?" "Grandpa always said money means nothing if you don't have a good heart. He told stories about rich people who were mean and poor people who were happy because they helped others." Frank smiled. It seemed William Reynolds was truly a special person. "Ethan, did your grandpa ever mention who would take care of you if something happened to him?" Ethan thought for a moment. "He said Mommy would choose someone very special for me, someone who'd love me for real, not because of the money." Frank felt a chill. It was becoming clearer that all of this had been planned. By the second week, the situation grew complicated again. Patricia showed up at Ethan's school, trying to convince the principal to hand him over to her. "I'm his aunt. He should be with family," Patricia argued. "Ma'am, the child is under legal temporary custody. I can't release him to anyone without the legal guardian's permission," Mrs. Linda replied firmly. Once Patricia left, the principal immediately called Frank. "Frank, that woman was very agitated. You need to be careful." Frank decided it was time to confront the situation directly. He called Richard Reynolds. "Dr. Richard, we need to talk. I know about the inheritance and I know you're trying to take Ethan." There was a long silence on the other end. "Mr. Frank, you don't understand the situation. Ethan is a minor and needs family to care for him." "Then where is his mother? Why did she leave him with me if you're so concerned about him?" Jennifer isn't well. She made rash decisions." "What kind of decisions?" "She ran off with my father's original will and disappeared. She left Ethan with you to hurt the rest of the family." Frank didn't believe Richard's version. "If that were true, you'd have gone to the police. It's complicated. Family matters." "Dr. Richard, I'll be direct with you. As long as Ethan is with me, he's safe and happy. He doesn't want to go with you. That should mean something." "You're making a huge mistake, Mr. Frank. My nephew is worth a lot of money, and there are people who'd do anything to control that inheritance." The veiled threat in Richard's voice left Frank uneasy. After hanging up, he made an important decision. He called Sheriff Johnson. "Sheriff, I'm getting veiled threats from Ethan's family. I think I need stronger legal protection." "Frank, come in tomorrow. I'll ask a social worker to assess Ethan's situation with you, and we'll formalize this custody arrangement better." The next morning, Frank and Ethan went to the police station. The social worker, Dr. Sarah, spoke at length with Ethan alone. After their conversation, she called Frank. "Mr. Frank, this child is clearly traumatized by family conflicts. He shows great fear when talking about his uncles, but is completely at ease when speaking about you." "What does that mean?" "It means that, from a psychological standpoint, Ethan is better cared for with you than he would be with his blood relatives. I'll prepare a report recommending the temporary custody be extended." That afternoon, Dr. Michael called with important news. "Frank, I found Jennifer. Where is she?" "She's hiding at a friend's house in Aspen, and what she told me is very important." "What did she say?" "William Reynolds actually left a specific clause in the will. Ethan will inherit everything, but only if raised by someone the testator's father, meaning William, approved of. And he left instructions for Jennifer to choose that person." "And she chose me?" "Not exactly. She investigated you, Frank." Frank was confused. "What do you mean, investigated?" "Jennifer spent weeks researching you. She spoke with your neighbors, other cab drivers, people you've helped. She found out you lost your son, and that since then, you've dedicated part of your time to helping kids in the neighborhood." Frank felt his eyes filling with tears. "She discovered you once helped a family whose son was sick, paying for part of the treatment out of your own pocket, and that you always stopped to help people on the street." "But why didn't she come talk to me directly?" "Because she was afraid you'd find out about the money and accept out of self-interest. She wanted you to accept Ethan for Ethan, not the inheritance." Frank fell silent, processing everything. "Dr. Michael, can I speak with her?" She wants to meet you in person. We can arrange a meeting. The next day, Frank took Ethan to meet his mother. The meeting was set in a square in Aspen. When Jennifer saw Ethan running toward her, she began to cry. "My son, my love, how are you?" Ethan hugged his mother tightly, but then turned to Frank. "Mommy, this is Frank. He took really good care of me." Jennifer looked at Frank with infinite gratitude. "Frank, I don't know how to thank you. I know what I did was strange, but I needed to be sure my son would be with someone who truly cared about him." "Jennifer, why didn't you come talk to me directly?" "Because if I told you about the inheritance, you might have accepted for the money. I needed to see if you'd take Ethan just because he needed help." Frank understood the logic, though he still found the whole situation very complicated. "And now? What happens?" "Now I have to make a difficult decision," Jennifer said. "My father-in-law made it clear he wanted Ethan raised by someone with integrity. You've proven you're that person. But you're his mother." "I am, and I always will be. But I can't protect him from my own family alone. They'll do anything to get custody of him." Jennifer explained the whole inheritance situation. William Reynolds had left an estate worth over $200 million, including businesses, properties, and investments. Everything would go to Ethan when he turned 25, but until then it would be managed by his legal guardian. "My father-in-law's brothers think they're entitled to that inheritance. They were left out of the will because William found out they'd been embezzling money from the companies. And they want custody of Ethan to control the money." "Exactly. That's why my father-in-law created these specific clauses. He wanted to protect Ethan from these people." Frank looked at Ethan, who was playing on the grass, oblivious to the complexity of the situation surrounding his life. "Jennifer, what exactly are you proposing?" "I'm proposing that you officially adopt Ethan, with my permission. I would still be his mother, but you would be his legal guardian. That way, the inheritance would be protected, and Ethan would grow up with someone who truly cares for him." "And you?" "I'd stay close. It could be an unconventional family, but a real one." Frank looked at Ethan and felt it made sense. In just 2 weeks, he had developed a fatherly love for the boy. "Jennifer, are you sure about this?" "I am. My father-in-law always said family isn't just about blood. It's about who's there in the hard times." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. Frank's decision brought a new wave of complications. Richard and Patricia didn't give up easily. They filed a lawsuit contesting Frank's custody and claimed Jennifer wasn't mentally fit to make decisions about her son. The legal battle lasted 3 tense months. During that time, Ethan continued living with Frank and attending school. Jennifer visited regularly, and little by little they formed an unusual but functional family routine. Dr. Michael worked tirelessly on the case. He proved the allegations about Jennifer's mental health were false, presented William Reynolds' original will, and brought forward several witnesses who vouched for Frank's character. During the trial, other important revelations came to light. An audit of the family businesses showed Richard and Patricia had indeed embezzled significant amounts over the years. William had discovered this before his death, but hadn't had time to take legal action. "Frank," Dr. Michael said in one of their meetings, "William's will is very clear. It states that if any family member tries to contest his decisions regarding Ethan's inheritance, they automatically lose any claim to the estate." Does that mean Richard and Patricia? It means they've forfeited any rights they might have had. Everything truly goes to Ethan. The final hearing was emotional. Ethan, now 8, was called to speak to the judge. "Ethan," said Judge Wilson, the presiding judge, "do you understand we're deciding who will take care of you?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And what would you like to happen?" Ethan looked at Frank, then at his mother, and finally at the judge. "I want to stay with Frank because he makes me feel safe. But I also want my mom to stay close because I love her so much. And I don't want to live with Uncle Richard and Aunt Patricia because they only talk about money and never ask if I'm okay." The judge smiled. "What if I said you could stay with Frank and your mom could visit whenever she wants?" Ethan smiled for the first time during the entire hearing. "That would be perfect." Judge Wilson granted Frank's adoption of Ethan, setting regular visits for Jennifer and ruling that Frank would manage the inheritance until Ethan turned 25. In his decision, Judge Wilson wrote, "This is a unique situation where financial interests were completely separated from the child's well-being. Mr. Frank Miller has demonstrated at every turn that his love for Ethan is genuine and selfless." After the trial, Richard and Patricia tried to appeal, but were advised by their own lawyer that they had no chance of overturning the decision. Moreover, they were facing lawsuits for embezzlement. Frank, Ethan, and Jennifer began a new life together. Frank continued working as a cab driver, but now with the added responsibility of managing a $1 million estate. The first decision they made together was about William's businesses. Frank, who had never dealt with large-scale enterprises, hired a team of professional managers to run the companies, but stayed involved in major decisions. "Ethan," Frank said during a conversation, "your grandpa left all this for you, but until you grow up, I'll take care of everything. What do you think he would have wanted us to do with the businesses?" Ethan, now more mature at 8 years old, thought carefully. "Grandpa always said money is good when it helps others. Maybe we can help people like you helped me." Inspired by the boy's simple wisdom, Frank created a social program within the companies. Part of the profits would go towards scholarships for underprivileged children and support for struggling families. But Frank knew his real responsibility was raising Ethan to be a person of integrity, regardless of the fortune he would inherit. Ethan grew up dividing his time between the simplicity of Frank's home in Forest Hills and the responsibilities that came with his inheritance. Frank made sure he learned the value of hard work by having him help maintain the cab and participate in community volunteer work. Jennifer, meanwhile, settled in New York City and resumed her career as a psychologist. She visited Ethan 3 times a week and spent weekends with him. Her relationship with Frank evolved from one of necessity to a deep and genuine friendship. "Frank," Jennifer said one day, "my father-in-law would have been so proud of the choice you made. Ethan is becoming exactly the kind of person he wanted him to be." 3 years after the adoption, when Ethan was 11, he surprised Frank with a proposal. "Frank, I was thinking, when I grow up and can take care of Grandpa's businesses, would you like to be my partner? Ethan, you don't need to worry about that now, but I want to. Grandpa left everything to me, but I think you deserve a part too. You took care of me when no one else would." Frank felt his eyes fill with tears. "Ethan, I didn't take care of you because of money. I did it because you needed me. I know. That's why I want to share with you, because you've proven you're my real dad." That night, Frank talked to Jennifer about Ethan's proposal. "Jennifer, what do you think? I think William had a prophetic vision when he wrote that will. He knew you wouldn't just take good care of Ethan, but also teach him to be generous and fair." When Ethan turned 15, Frank made another important decision. He created a cab cooperative in the neighborhood, employing other drivers who were struggling. Part of Ethan's inheritance was used to buy new cars and equipment. "Ethan," Frank explained, "your grandpa built businesses that provide jobs for many people. I want you to learn that having money comes with the responsibility of helping others get opportunities too." Ethan, now a mature and responsible teenager, became actively involved in the social projects. He helped Frank interview candidates for the cooperative and participated in planning meetings for the company's social programs. One of Ethan's most striking traits was his ease in connecting with people from all walks of life. He was just as comfortable talking to company executives as he was with Frank's neighbors in Forest Hills. "Frank," Mrs. Betty said once, "you've raised a special boy. He's down to earth, even knowing he's a millionaire." When Ethan turned 18, Frank threw a simple party in their backyard. The whole neighborhood was invited, along with some company executives and school friends. During the party, Ethan gave a speech that moved everyone. 11 years ago, my grandpa passed away and left me a very large inheritance. But the greatest legacy I received wasn't money. It was meeting Frank, who taught me what it means to be a real person." Frank was openly crying. "My grandpa wanted me to be raised by someone with integrity. He chose better than he could have imagined. Frank didn't just raise me, he taught me that a person's worth isn't in what they have, but in what they do for others." At that party, Ethan announced that when he turned 25 and fully inherited his fortune, He would create a foundation to help orphaned children and struggling families. "And Frank will be the president of that foundation," Ethan said, "because no one understands better than he does what it means to save a child." The following years were spent preparing. Ethan studied business and law, always with Frank and Jennifer's support. Frank, in turn, specialized in non-profit management, readying himself for the challenge Ethan had set. When Ethan turned 25, the official transfer of the inheritance was a simple ceremony at the notary's office. Only Frank, Jennifer, Dr. Michael, and Mrs. Betty were present. "Ethan," the notary said, "you are now officially in possession of an estate worth approximately $500 million, as the companies have grown significantly in recent years." Ethan smiled and looked at Frank. "Frank, will you be my official partner in all this?" Frank, now 52, smiled back. "I accept, son. I accept with pride." Ethan's first decision as the official owner of the companies was to make Frank a 30% partner in everything. The second was to establish the William Reynolds Foundation, chaired by Frank, dedicated to helping at-risk children. The foundation's launch ceremony was held in the same square where Frank had found Ethan 17 years earlier. There, Ethan, now a young man of 25, gave another moving speech. "This square changed my life and Frank's forever. Here began a story of fatherly love that proves family isn't just about blood. It's about choice. It's about being there when you're needed." Frank looked at Ethan with endless pride. The frightened boy he'd found had grown into a man of integrity, generosity, and responsibility. Jennifer, now 50 and a respected psychologist, also joined the foundation's board, overseeing psychological care for the children they helped. Frank's taxi cooperative had grown into one of the city's largest, providing dignified jobs for over 200 drivers. Ethan made sure to meet every employee personally. Mrs. Betty, now 82, had become Ethan's official grandmother. She often said she'd witnessed the miracle of a family formed through love and dedication. 5 years after the foundation's creation, Frank was invited to give a lecture on adoptive parenting at a university. Ethan went with him. "How would you define your experience as an adoptive father?" a student asked. Frank thought for a moment before answering. "I'd say there's no such thing as an adoptive father. There's just father. Ethan is my son in the same way he would be if I'd fathered him. The difference is, I chose him consciously and deliberately, and he chose me back." Ethan, sitting in the audience, was moved by the answer. After the lecture, father and son walked through the university. "Frank, do you regret anything from all these years?" Frank stopped and looked at Ethan seriously. "Ethan, I regret only one thing." "What?" "Not having the courage to call you my son sooner. It took me years to realize you were already my son from the very first day." Ethan hugged Frank tightly. "You've always been my father, Frank, since that day in the square when you could have handed me over to any authority but chose to take me home instead." At that moment, they both realized the true legacy of William Reynolds hadn't been money or businesses. It had been the chance for two lonely souls, a taxi driver who had lost a son and a boy who needed a father, to find each other and build a family based on real love. The story of Frank and Ethan became well known in New York City and inspired others to consider adoption. The William Reynolds Foundation specialized in facilitating responsible adoptions, always reminding everyone that the most important thing wasn't the financial status of the adoptive parents, but their capacity to love. Ethan, now 30, had married Emily, a social worker he met at the foundation. They had 2 children, William, named after his great-grandfather, and Frank, named after his adoptive grandfather. Frank, now 57, had become a grandfather and still drove his taxi twice a week, not out of financial need, but because he enjoyed connecting with ordinary people in the city. "Grandpa Frank," said little William, 5 years old, one afternoon, "Daddy told me you found him in a square when he was little." "That's right, my dear grandson. And you became father and son just because you wanted to," Frank smiled. "Exactly. Sometimes the best families are the ones we choose with our hearts." The boy thought for a moment. "So you chose to be my grandpa too?" "Yes, I did, and it was the best choice of my life." The William Reynolds Foundation had grown into one of the most respected social organizations in the country. Frank, as its president, had developed innovative programs that had already helped thousands of children find loving families. One afternoon, at 59, Frank was driving his taxi when he saw something that made him stop immediately. A child around 6 years old was alone in a square, crying. Frank parked the taxi and approached the little girl. "Hi there, sweetheart. Are you okay?" The girl lifted her tear-streaked face. Her dark eyes were full of fear. "I don't know where I am," she whispered. Frank felt a wave of déjà vu. 23 years later, history seemed to be repeating itself. "What's your name?" "Olivia." Frank looked around. There was no sign of any adult searching for the girl. "Olivia, would you like to come with me? We'll call your parents and let them know where you are." The girl hesitated, but there was something in Frank's eyes that reassured her. "Are you nice?" Frank smiled, remembering Ethan asking the same question so many years ago. "Yes, I am. And I'll take care of you until we find your family." That night, Frank called Ethan. "Son, you won't believe what happened today." After hearing the story, Ethan laughed. "Frank, I think Grandpa William is sending more angels your way." "Maybe so. Olivia is sleeping in the room that used to be yours when you were little." "So what's the plan?" "The same as always. First, protect the child. Then, figure out what really happened. And if necessary, fight for custody." Ethan knew Frank would handle it right. After all, he had learned from the best. 3 days later, they discovered Olivia had been abandoned by her own family due to financial struggles. Her parents, young and desperate, couldn't care for her and 2 other younger children. Frank didn't hesitate. At 59, he began the process of adopting Olivia. Ethan and Emily offered all the support he needed. "Frank," Ethan said, "are you sure you want to be a father again at nearly 60? "Ethan, you taught me that being a father isn't about age, it's about love." Olivia quickly adapted to the family. She called Frank Grandpa Frank, Ethan Uncle Ethan, and soon became the big sister to little William and Frank. Mrs. Betty, now 87, said she had lived long enough to see Frank build 2 families based on unconditional love. A year after Olivia's adoption, the whole family gathered in the square where it all began to celebrate the 24 years since Frank and Ethan first met. "Frank," Ethan said during the ceremony, "you saved my life when I was a child. Now you've saved Olivia's life. How many more lives will you save?" Frank looked at Olivia, who was playing with his grandchildren, then at Ethan, now a happy and fulfilled man. "As many as God puts in my path, son, as many as God puts in my path." The William Reynolds Foundation continued to grow, inspired by the real-life examples of Frank and Ethan. They proved that family isn't defined by blood, but by love, dedication, and conscious choice. Frank never considered himself a hero. To him, he had simply followed his heart and done what any decent person would do, protect a child in need. But Ethan knew the truth. Frank was a hero. An ordinary hero who drove a yellow cab through the streets of New York City and had transformed the lives of 2 children just by being the kind and loving man he always was. And the greatest lesson Frank taught Ethan, Olivia, and everyone who heard their story was simple. Sometimes the greatest legacy we can leave isn't money or material things, but the example of how to love unconditionally and protect those who need it most. The end. And what about you, dear listener? What did you think of this touching story? Do you believe Frank made the right choices in protecting Ethan? And what do you think about families built on love, not blood? Share your thoughts in the comments. It means so much to us. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss more heartwarming stories. Thank you for joining us.